The deafening thrum of the helicopter blades was nothing compared to the roaring silence in Amelia's heart. Thousands of feet below, on the shimmering deck of the Serenity, a yacht worth more than a small nation, her husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect her and their unborn child, was pressing his lips against another woman's. But as the chopper circled, a slow, deliberate smile spread across Amelia's face. In her hands, nestled against her burgeoning belly, was a leather-bound folder. It wasn't a divorce filing or a self-help book. It was a transfer contract, and the ink on it was still fresh. The real storm wasn't on the sun-drenched Mediterranean, but brewing in her calculating eyes. The world knew him as Adrian Thorne, the charismatic billionaire who had single-handedly revolutionized the green energy sector with his company, Thorne Power. To the public, he was a visionary, a philanthropist, a man who could charm the birds from the trees and the stock market into submission. To Amelia, he was the architect of her gilded cage, a prison so beautiful she hadn't realized its bars were closing in until it was too late. Their love story had been the stuff of tabloids and fairy tales. Amelia, a brilliant but unassuming art historian, had met Adrian at a Sotheby's auction in London. He was there to acquire a rare Monet. She was there to present her research on its provenance. He had been captivated not by her quiet beauty, but by the fire in her eyes as she spoke about brushstrokes and hidden histories. He pursued her with the same relentless focus he applied to his business dealings, extravagant dates, surprise trips to Florence to see the Uffizi Gallery, and a deluge of attention that left her breathless and dizzyingly in love. He had painted a future for them, a masterpiece of shared dreams and endless possibilities. He had promised her a partnership, a life where her intellect would be his most valued asset. And for a while, it had been true. She had been his confidant, his sounding board, the one person who could challenge his assumptions and see the flaws in his grand designs. He had listened, or so she had thought. The first cracks in their perfect facade began to appear subtly. Business trips grew longer. His phone became an extension of his hand, guarded with a password he claimed was for corporate security. The easy laughter that had once filled their sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park was replaced by a tense quiet, punctuated by the staccato tapping of his fingers on a keyboard. He started making decisions without her billion-dollar deals she would read about in the Wall Street Journal along with the rest of the world. When she confronted him, he was a master of deflection, a virtuoso of gaslighting. She was being emotional, overthinking things. Didn't she know how much pressure he was under? He was doing all of this for them, for their future, for the child she now carried. The pregnancy, which should have been their greatest joy, became his ultimate shield. Any protest, any question, any hint of dissent was met with a patronizing, "Darling, you need to rest. Think of the baby." The Serenity was the latest in a long line of extravagant purchases he had made without her input. A 300-foot marvel of engineering and opulence, it was a floating testament to his ego. He had unveiled it to her as a surprise, a baby moon getaway to the Mediterranean before their lives were consumed by parenthood. She had feigned delight, the perfect supportive wife, while a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She knew this wasn't for them, it was for him. It was a stage for the new life he was building, a life in which she was being relegated to a supporting role. The other woman's name was Isabella Rossi. Amelia had learned about her through the discreet inquiries of a private investigator she had hired months ago, a man who specialized in the sordid secrets of the ultra-rich. Isabella was a model, an influencer, a vapid creature of the digital age, whose every pout and pose was curated for maximum online adoration. She was everything. Amelia was not young, carefree, and utterly uncomplicated. She was a beautiful distraction, a human trophy, to be paraded on the arm of a man who had grown tired of a partner and yearned for a possession. The investigator's report had been clinical and devastating, a collection of grainy photographs and itemized timelines of trysts in five-star hotels and secluded villas. But seeing it with her own eyes from the nauseating vantage point of a hovering helicopter was a visceral, gut-wrenching confirmation of her deepest fears. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept, a collection of facts on a page. It was a searing technicolor reality. There on the gleaming teak deck, Adrian was laughing, a sound Amelia hadn't heard directed at her in what felt like an eternity. He was pouring Isabella a glass of champagne, his hand lingering on her bare waist. He leaned in, his words lost to the wind and the whine of the rotors, but his intentions were unmistakable. And then the kiss. It was long and deep, a passionate proprietary act that staked his claim on her in the golden afternoon sun. A single tear escaped Amelia's eye, a hot, traitorous drop that traced a path down her cold cheek. She quickly brushed it away. Now was not the time for weakness. Now was the time for the cold, hard resolve she had been cultivating for the past 6 months. Now was the time for the plan. She had so meticulously crafted a plan that would unravel Adrian's carefully constructed empire and leave him with nothing but the echo of his own deceit. She looked down at the leather-bound folder in her lap. The transfer contract. It was her masterpiece, a work of art far more intricate and valuable than any Monet. Inside, on crisp watermarked paper, was the culmination of weeks of secret meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and a very disgruntled former board member of Thorn Power. Adrian, in his arrogance, had made a critical error. In the early days of their marriage, in a grand gesture of trust and love, he had given her a 51% stake in a shell corporation, a holding company that on the surface seemed to manage their personal assets, their homes, their art collection, their fleet of luxury cars. But Amelia, with her historian's eye for detail and her innate understanding of complex systems, had dug deeper. She had spent countless nights poring over financial statements and corporate charters, tracing the labyrinthine connections between the shell company and the vast, sprawling entity that was Thorn Power. She discovered that the shell company A&A Holdings was not just a container for their personal wealth. It was the linchpin, the keystone in the arch of Adrian's entire corporate structure. It held the controlling interest in a series of smaller, seemingly insignificant subsidiary companies that in turn owned the patents to the very technology that made Thorn Power the titan it was. It was a structure designed for tax evasion, an asset protection, a legal fortress so convoluted that Adrian believed no one would ever be able to penetrate it. But he had underestimated his wife. He had mistaken her quiet intelligence for passivity, her love for blindness. The transfer contract was a simple, elegant document. It transferred her 51% ownership of A&A Holdings to a new entity, a trust she had established with a board of directors loyal to her. The moment she signed it, the moment it was legally executed, she would become the majority shareholder, the silent, unseen power behind the throne. Adrian would still be the face of Thorn Power, the celebrated CEO, but he would be a king in name only a puppet whose strings she now controlled. The pilot's voice crackled through her headset. "Ma'am, we've been circling for 10 minutes. Do you want to head back?" Amelia took a deep, steadying breath, the salt-tinged air filling her lungs. She looked down one last time at the scene on the yacht. Isabella was now lying on a sun lounger, her lithe body glistening with oil, while Adrian stood over her, a predatory glint in his eye. They were a tableau of cheap, predictable lust, a cliché playing out on a multi-million-dollar stage. A genuine smile, the first she had felt in a very long time, touched Amelia's lips. It was a smile of triumph, of liberation, of the sweet, intoxicating promise of revenge. "No," she said, her voice clear and firm, devoid of any tremor of emotion. "Take us lower. I want a better view." As the helicopter descended, she opened the folder and took out a pen, a sterling silver Mont Blanc that Adrian had given her on their first anniversary. The irony was not lost on her. With a steady hand, she signed her name on the dotted line, the elegant loops and swirls of her signature sealing his fate. The date was June 7th, 2025, a day that Adrian Thorne would remember for the rest of his life, not as a day of sun-drenched infidelity, but as the day he lost everything, and he didn't even know it yet. She was pregnant, betrayed, and now she was in control. The game had just begun. To understand the depth of Adrian's betrayal, one had to understand the man himself. Adrian Thorne was not born into wealth. He was forged in the crucible of ambition and a desperate clawing need to escape the suffocating mediocrity of his upbringing. He was a product of a drab working-class suburb of Boston, a world of faded vinyl siding and broken dreams. His father was a bitter, broken man who had lost his job at the local factory and his hope in the bottom of a bottle. His mother was a ghost, a woman worn down by a life of thankless drudgery. Adrian's brilliance was his escape route. He devoured books, excelled in school, and earned a scholarship to MIT, where his prodigious intellect found its focus. He was a chameleon, shedding the skin of his humble origins and adopting the mannerisms and speech patterns of the elite. He learned to sail, to appreciate fine wine, to discuss art and politics with an easy, confident grace. He was a man perpetually in the act of self-creation, and Thorne power was to be his Sistine Chapel. He had loved Amelia, or at least he had loved the idea of her. She was his intellectual equal, a woman who could challenge him and make him better. She was also his anchor, the one who saw past the carefully constructed facade to the insecure boy from Boston. In her eyes, he was not just Adrian Thorne, the billionaire visionary, he was simply Adrian. And for a time, that was enough. But as his empire grew, so did his paranoia. The boy who had been terrified of returning to a life of poverty became a man terrified of losing what he had built. He saw rivals and threats in every boardroom, in every news headline, in every whispered conversation. His mind, once a fertile ground for innovation, became a breeding ground for suspicion. He began to view Amelia not as a partner, but as a potential liability. Her intelligence, which he had once admired, now seemed like a threat. Her questions about the business, once welcome, now felt like interrogations. He started to compartmentalize his life, to build walls between his personal and professional worlds, and Amelia found herself on the wrong side of those walls. The decision to give her a controlling stake in A&A Holdings had been a calculated risk, a move made early in their marriage when his love for her was still a powerful, intoxicating force. He had been so sure of her devotion, so confident in his ability to manage her that he had handed her the keys to his kingdom without a second thought. It was a gesture of supreme arrogance, a testament to his belief that he was always the smartest person in the room. Isabella Rossi was the antithesis of Amelia. She was a beautiful empty vessel into which he could pour his desires and his ego. She didn't challenge him, she adored him. She didn't ask difficult questions. She giggled at his jokes and admired his wealth. She was a reflection of his own success, a living, breathing testament to the fact that he could have anything and anyone he wanted. He had met her at a charity gala in Monaco, an event he had attended without Amelia claiming it was a last-minute business obligation. Isabella had been hired as an ornament, one of a dozen models paid to mingle with the super-rich and make them feel even more powerful. She had attached herself to him with the tenacity of a barnacle, her flattery as cloying and as effective as cheap perfume. Their affair was not a grand passion. It was a transaction. He provided her with a lifestyle of unimaginable luxury, designer clothes, lavish apartments, a constant stream of social media-worthy experiences. In return, she provided him with uncomplicated adoration and a sense of youthful virility that he had begun to feel slipping away. She was a balm to his bruised ego, a distraction from the gnawing emptiness that had taken root in his soul. On the deck of the Serenity, as he kissed Isabella, he felt a fleeting sense of triumph. He was Adrian Thorne, master of the universe, a man who could command the tides and the affections of beautiful women. He was powerful, desired, and in control. He had no idea that hundreds of feet above him, in the belly of a private helicopter, the woman he had so casually dismissed was methodically dismantling his world piece by intricate piece. He had forgotten the most important rule of the game he was playing: never underestimate your opponent, especially when you are the one who taught them how to play. He had shown Amelia his world, explained the complex machinery of his empire, and then, in his hubris, he had turned his back on her. He had given her a weapon, and now she was about to use it with the precision and ruthlessness of a master strategist. The architect of deception was about to become the victim of his own design. The days that followed the helicopter incident were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Amelia returned to their New York penthouse, her demeanor a perfect blend of wifely concern and maternal serenity. She played the part of the expectant mother, flawlessly discussing nursery colors, interviewing nannies, and feigning blissful ignorance of her husband's transgressions. Adrian, for his part, returned from his Mediterranean jaunt, tanned, relaxed, and utterly oblivious. He was attentive and affectionate, his guilt manifesting as a series of extravagant gifts and cloying endearments. He bought her a ridiculously expensive diamond necklace, which she accepted with a quiet smile, knowing it had been purchased with money that was for all intents and purposes now hers. She let him live in his fool's paradise for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of shared meals where she would listen patiently to his fabricated stories of business meetings and successful negotiations. 2 weeks of sleepless nights where she would lie beside him, her mind racing with plans and contingencies, while he snored softly, a man at peace with his own lies. The first blow fell on a Tuesday morning. Adrian was in a board meeting at the Thorne Power headquarters, a sleek glass and steel tower in the heart of Manhattan. The meeting was a routine affair, a review of the quarterly earnings report. He was in his element, exuding confidence and control, when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his chief financial officer. "We have a problem," the message read. "A big one." Adrian excused himself from the meeting, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. He stepped into his private office, a minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city, and called his CFO. "What is it, David?" He snapped, his voice sharp with impatience. David's voice was strained, laced with a barely concealed panic. "There's been a transfer, a massive one. A&A Holdings. The controlling interest has been moved to a new entity, a trust, the Amelia Thorne Trust." Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. The panoramic view of the city suddenly seemed to tilt and sway. "What the hell are you talking about?" He managed to stammer, his mind struggling to process the information. "It's all legal, Adrian," David said, his voice a grim monotone. "The paperwork is ironclad. We've had our legal team go over it. It was executed 2 weeks ago, signed, sealed, and delivered. She owns you, lock, stock, and barrel." The phone slipped from Adrian's numb fingers and clattered onto the polished marble floor. He stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, but the man looking back at him was a stranger, a ghost, in a bespoke suit. The empire he had built, the fortress he had believed to be impregnable, had been conquered from within, and the conqueror was his pregnant wife. He stumbled back to the boardroom, his face a mask of disbelief. He tried to regain his composure, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but the other board members could see the change in him. The air of invincibility that had always surrounded him had vanished, replaced by a chilling vulnerability. The second blow came a week later. Amelia had called a meeting of the board of directors of the Amelia Thorne Trust. The meeting was held not in a corporate boardroom, but in the library of her and Adrian's penthouse, a room filled with first editions and the scent of old leather and fresh flowers. The board consisted of 3 people: Amelia herself, a formidable silver-haired lawyer named Eleanor Vance, who had been Amelia's secret weapon in the creation of the trust, and a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Adrian's older brother, a quiet, unassuming man who had lived his entire life in the shadow of his brilliant, ambitious younger sibling. He had worked for Thorne Power for years, a mid-level manager in the research and development department, constantly overlooked and undervalued by Adrian. He was a man of integrity and quiet brilliance, and he harbored a deep-seated resentment for the brother who had treated him with little more than disdain. Amelia had approached Marcus months ago, after her private investigator had uncovered not only Adrian's infidelity, but also a pattern of financial irregularities and ethically dubious business practices within Thorne Power. Marcus, who had long suspected his brother was cutting corners and breaking rules, had been a willing and invaluable ally. He had provided Amelia with the inside information she needed to understand the true vulnerabilities of Adrian's empire. Now, as they sat around the large mahogany table, Amelia laid out her plan. It was not a plan for destruction, but for transformation. She did not want to ruin Thorne Power. She wanted to remake it in her own image. She wanted to purge it of the corruption and greed that Adrian had allowed to fester, and to restore it to the visionary, world-changing company it was meant to be. "Adrian will remain as the CEO," she announced, her voice calm and steady. "For now. He is still the face of the company, and a public power struggle would be catastrophic for our stock price, but he will no longer have an autonomous decision-making power. All major strategic and financial decisions will be routed through this board. We will be the guiding hand, the true seat of power." She turned to Marcus. "Marcus, I am promoting you to Chief Operating Officer. You will be my eyes and ears on the ground. You will oversee the day-to-day operations and ensure that the company is run with the integrity and vision it deserves." Marcus, a man not given to displays of emotion, looked at Amelia with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "I won't let you down," he said, his voice thick with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years' hope. The final piece of her plan was the most audacious. She intended to create a new philanthropic arm of Thorn Power, the Thorn Foundation, dedicated to supporting the arts education and social justice causes. It would be funded by a significant portion of the company's profits, a move that would undoubtedly infuriate Adrian and the more profit-driven members of the board. Thorn Power has a responsibility to do more than just make money, Amelia said, her eyes shining with a passion that Adrian had not seen in years. It has a responsibility to make the world a better place. And under our leadership, it will. As the meeting concluded, Amelia felt a sense of profound satisfaction. She had not only reclaimed her own power, but she had also created a new future for the company that bore her husband's name. She had formed an alliance with a man her husband had cast aside, and together they would forge a new legacy, one built on a foundation of integrity, not deceit. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. Adrian would not relinquish his power without a fight. There would be battles in the boardroom, clashes of will, and a constant underlying tension that would permeate every aspect of their lives. But Amelia was ready. She had faced the ultimate betrayal and had emerged not broken, but stronger, more determined, and in complete control. She was no longer the quiet art historian, the supportive wife in the background. She was the matriarch of a new dynasty, and she would protect her child, her company, and her future with the ferocity of a lioness. The queen had taken the castle, and the king was now her prisoner. The aftermath of Amelia's corporate coup was not a swift, clean execution. It was a slow, meticulous dismantling of Adrian Thorne's identity. The world he had built, and a world that had once revolved around his every whim and command, now operated with a cool, efficient indifference to his presence. He was a ghost in his own machine, a king presiding over a kingdom that no longer recognized his authority. The gilded cage he had so carefully constructed for Amelia had become his own, and the bars were forged from his own arrogance. His days began with a hollow ritual. He would dress in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, the fabric of familiar comfort against his skin, and be driven in his Maybach to the gleaming Thorn Power Tower. But the moment he stepped into the lobby, the illusion of power would shatter. The security guards, once deferential to the point of sycophancy, now offered a polite but detached nod. The executives in the elevator men, who had once jockeyed for a moment of his attention, would now fall into an awkward silence, their eyes darting nervously between him and the floor indicator. The boardroom, once his arena, was now Amelia's court. He still sat at the head of the table, a symbolic gesture that only served to amplify his impotence. But the true center of gravity had shifted. All eyes turned to Amelia, her presence a study in serene authority. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were precise, insightful, and final. She would listen patiently to the presentations, her hands often resting on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly, a silent, constant reminder of the future she was building. A future in which he was a subordinate. His most profound humiliation came at the hands of his own brother. Marcus, the man he had dismissed for years as a plodding, unimaginative functionary, was now the chief operating officer, and he was flourishing. He ran the company with a steady, competent hand, his deep institutional knowledge proving to be an invaluable asset. He wasn't flashy, he didn't have Adrian's charismatic flair, but he had something Adrian had long since lost, the genuine respect of his colleagues. Adrian would watch, simmering with a toxic brew of resentment and envy, as Marcus would calmly and methodically dissect a logistical problem or a supply chain issue that Adrian, in his hubris, had long ignored. Marcus never gloated, never lauded his newfound power over his brother. His professionalism was absolute, and that, in its own way, was the cruelest cut of all. It was a constant, unspoken indictment of Adrian's own failings as a leader. One afternoon, Adrian, desperate to reassert some semblance of control, tried to intervene in a decision about a new turbine design. He strode into Marcus's office, a space he had never deigned to visit before, and began to pontificate his words, a flurry of technical jargon and aggressive posturing. Marcus listened patiently, his hands steepled on his desk. When Adrian had finished, Marcus simply pushed a tablet across the desk. On the screen was a detailed report from the R&D department, a report that clearly and concisely demonstrated why Adrian's preferred design was inefficient and outdated. "The data is clear," Adrian Marcus said, his voice even and devoid of malice. "We're going with the more efficient model. It's better for the company, and it's better for the environment. It's the right call." Adrian stared at the data, his face flushing with a hot, prickling shame. He had been so out of touch, so consumed by his own ego, that he hadn't even bothered to read the reports. He was a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era, and his own brother had just gently but firmly pointed it out. He retreated from Marcus's office, the weight of his irrelevance pressing down on him like a physical force. His personal life was an even more exquisite form of torture. The affair with Isabella, once a source of illicit pleasure and ego gratification, had become a festering wound. The moment his financial assets were frozen and his power curtailed, her adoration had curdled into a shrill, demanding sense of entitlement. He met her in a private suite at the Carlisle, a place that had once been the backdrop for their clandestine trysts, but the glamour had faded, replaced by a sordid, transactional ugliness. "What do you mean you have to scale back?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the silk-paneled walls. She was waving a platinum credit card in his face, a card that had been unceremoniously declined at Bergdorf Goodman that afternoon. "This isn't the deal, Adrian. I have a brand to maintain. I can't be seen in last season's couture. Things are complicated right now, Isabella," he said, his voice weary. He felt a profound sense of disgust, not just for her, but for himself, for the man who had found this vapid, grasping creature so alluring. Complicated, she sneered, her beautifully made-up face contorting into a mask of contempt. "You mean your wife has you by the balls? I've seen the whispers in the gossip columns. The Queen of Thorn Power. They say she's a genius. They say she's running circles around you." Each word was a fresh stab to his already wounded pride. He tried to end it, to sever the ties with a final, generous severance package. But Isabella was a shrewder negotiator than he had ever given her credit for. A one-time payment, she laughed, a harsh, metallic sound. "Don't be ridiculous. I want a contract, a monthly stipend, and an NDA so airtight that you'll be paying for my silence for the rest of your life. Or maybe I'll just have a little chat with Page 6. I'm sure they'd love to hear all about our trip on the Serenity. I have pictures, you know, lots of them." He was trapped, blackmailed by his mistress, controlled by his wife. He signed the contract, the ink on the page, a testament to his utter and complete defeat. He was paying a fortune for a secret that in all likelihood his wife already knew. The thought was so galling, so profoundly humiliating, that he felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The penthouse, his sanctuary, became a battleground of silent warfare. He and Amelia would sit at opposite ends of their massive dining table, the clinking of their silverware, the only sound in the cavernous room. She would read a book or a financial report, her focus absolute, while he would stare out at the city lights, feeling like the loneliest man in the world. He tried to provoke her, to get a reaction, to break through the wall of her infuriating calm. He would make snide remarks about her pet projects at the foundation or question her business decisions in a passive-aggressive tone. But she never took the bait. She would simply look up from her reading, her gaze clear and unwavering, and offer a polite, dispassionate response that would leave him feeling small and foolish. The breaking point, the moment of absolute capitulation, came during a board meeting that would be forever seared into his memory. Amelia, in her calm, measured tone, proposed the most audacious plan, yet the creation of a multi-billion-dollar Thorn Foundation initiative to fund arts education in underprivileged schools across the country. It was a noble idea, a visionary concept. It was the kind of legacy-defining move he himself would have once championed. But coming from her in this context, it felt like the final nail in his coffin. It was a direct repudiation of everything he had built, of the profit at all costs ethos that had been his mantra for a decade. He erupted. For the first time in weeks, the old Adrian Thorne, the ruthless, aggressive titan of industry, made an appearance. He stood up, his voice booming across the boardroom, and launched into a tirade against what he called a fiscally irresponsible, sentimental vanity project. He spoke of shareholder value, of fiduciary duty, of the brutal realities of the marketplace. He painted a grim picture of a company weakened by sentimentality, a giant brought to its knees by the charitable whims of its new queen. He was passionate, he was articulate, he was fighting for the soul of his company. But as he spoke, he could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The board members, a mix of his old allies and Amelia's new appointees, listened not with rapt attention, but with a kind of weary patience. They looked at him as if he were a relic, a man shouting into the wind, oblivious to the fact that the world had moved on without him. When he finally ran out of steam, his chest heaving, a deafening silence descended upon the room. Amelia, who had not flinched or interrupted, looked at him not with anger, but with a kind of pity that was more devastating than any rage. "The purpose of wealth, Adrian," she said, her voice quiet but resonant, with an unshakable power, "is not just to accumulate more wealth. It is to create something of lasting value, something that will make a difference in the world. We have a responsibility that goes beyond the bottom line. Thorn Power will be a force for good. That is not a proposal. It is a directive." She didn't need to call a vote. The assent was palpable, a silent, unanimous wave of support. His allies, men who had once been his staunchest supporters, nodded in agreement, their eyes avoiding his. They had seen the writing on the wall. The future was Amelia. He was the past. That night, the fragile piece of the penthouse shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The silent war became a shouting match. "Who do you think you are?" he yelled, his voice raw, with a pain so deep it felt like it was tearing him apart. "You're destroying everything I've built. You're turning my company into a charity, a playground for your liberal fantasies." Amelia faced him, her back straight, her chin high. The serene mask had fallen away, and in its place was a fire he had not seen since the early days of their relationship. "Your company," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "I seem to recall that I am the majority shareholder. It is my company now, and I will run it as I see fit. I am building a legacy for our son, Adrian. What were you building? A monument to your own ego? You did this to punish me, he sneered, lashing out, desperate to wound her as he had been wounded. For Isabella, this is all about revenge. A sad, weary smile touched Amelia's lips, and it was the most devastating blow of all. You give yourself too much credit, Adrian, and you give Isabella far too much importance. She was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was your arrogance, your greed, your belief that you could treat people as disposable commodities. I saw it in the way you dismissed Marcus, the way you treated your employees, the way you were starting to treat me. I saw the man I loved disappearing, replaced by a hollow shell. She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. I am not punishing you, Adrian. I am saving you from yourself. She placed a hand on her belly. And more importantly, I am saving him from you. Our son will not be raised by the man you have become. He will know a father who stands for something more than just a stock price. He will know the brilliant, passionate, visionary man I fell in love with. And if you can't find that man again, then I will build a world where he is protected from your influence. She turned to leave her words hanging in the air like a death sentence. But then she paused, her hand on the doorframe. I know about the helicopter, Adrian. I know about the kiss. I saw it all. The confession was delivered without malice, a simple statement of fact that landed with the force of a physical blow. He stared at her speechless, the last of his defenses crumbling into dust. She had known all along. His pathetic attempts at concealment, his carefully constructed lies, had been a transparent farce. I didn't do this out of spite, she continued, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. I did it out of necessity. You left me no other choice. You were going to throw away everything that mattered, our marriage, our family, the integrity of the company you built. I simply took it all away before you could destroy it. She left him then standing alone in the cavernous room, the city lights twinkling like a million mocking eyes. He sank onto a sofa, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a profound, crushing emptiness. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought, and outclassed by the woman he had sworn to love and protect. He was the king in a gilded cage, a prisoner of his own making. But for the first time, a sliver of light pierced through the darkness of his despair. The woman who held the key was not his jailer, but his last, best hope for redemption. The battle for Thorn Power was over, but the long, arduous battle for his own soul had just begun. The final months of Amelia's pregnancy unfolded not in a whirlwind of romantic reconciliation, but in a slow, deliberate reconstruction of a life that had been shattered. The change within Thorn Power and within Adrian himself was not a sudden epiphany, but a painstaking, brick-by-brick rebuilding process on a foundation that was still fragile. Under the new regime, Thorn Power began to breathe again. The oppressive high-pressure atmosphere that had defined Adrian's reign dissipated, replaced by a palpable sense of purpose. Marcus, with his quiet, steadfast leadership, proved to be a master of operations. He streamlined departments, promoted talented individuals who had been overlooked for years, and fostered a culture of collaboration that Adrian, in his isolated arrogance, had never been able to achieve. Amelia, the architect of this new world, guided the company's grand strategy. After the successful launch of the Arts Education Initiative, she turned her attention to the very core of the business, its environmental impact. Thorn Power had built its reputation on green energy, but Amelia knew from Marcus's inside information and her own meticulous research that the company's practices were far from pristine. Adrian, in his relentless pursuit of profit, had cut corners on waste disposal, sourced materials from ethically questionable suppliers, and lobbied aggressively against stricter environmental regulations. Amelia's next major directive was a comprehensive company-wide audit called Project Evergreen. Its goal was to make Thorn Power the most environmentally responsible energy company on the planet, not just in its marketing, but in its very DNA. This meant investing billions in new, cleaner manufacturing processes, overhauling the entire supply chain, and transparently publishing annual environmental impact reports. The initiative was met with a firestorm of resistance from the old guard. The chief financial officer, David, a man who had been Adrian's loyal bulldog for 15 years, argued vehemently in a board meeting that Project Evergreen would decimate their profit margins. "We're an energy company, not a nature preserve," he boomed, his face red with indignation. "The shareholders will revolt." Adrian sat at the head of the table, silent. A few months ago, he would have led this charge. He would have torn Amelia's proposal to shreds with ruthless, condescending logic. But now he listened. He watched as Amelia calmly dismantled David's arguments, not with emotion, but with irrefutable data. She presented projections showing that while the initial investment would be substantial, the long-term benefits in brand reputation, consumer loyalty, and eventual operational efficiencies would far outweigh the costs. She spoke of future-proofing the company against the inevitable tide of stricter global regulations. "The market is changing, David," Amelia stated, her voice cutting through the tension. "Consumers, especially the next generation, want to invest in and buy from companies that align with their values. Short-term profit at the expense of long-term integrity is a fool's game. We will lead this change, or we will be rendered obsolete by it." She won, of course. David, seeing the shift in the room, reluctantly conceded. Adrian felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a flicker of pride in her. Her vision was bolder than his had ever been. He had sought to dominate the present. She was securing the future. Humbled and adrift, Adrian began a tentative journey of self-discovery. Amelia, in a move of strategic genius, insisted that he personally oversee the initial rollout of the Thorn Foundation's arts program. It was a subtle but brilliant test. He was forced to leave the sterile comfort of the executive suite and visit the inner-city schools and community centers that were receiving their funding. His first visit was to a dilapidated community center in the Bronx. He arrived in his Maybach, an ostentatious symbol of a world away, and was met by a fiery, no-nonsense director named Maria Sanchez. She looked at his expensive suit and impassive face with unconcealed skepticism. He was awkward and out of place, a king in exile. He watched as children who had never held a paintbrush before created vibrant, chaotic, joyful canvases. He saw a teenage girl who had been silent and withdrawn come alive as she recited a piece of spoken-word poetry. He listened as Maria explained how this program was not just about art, but about giving these kids a voice, a sense of self-worth, a safe harbor from the violence and poverty that surrounded them. A young boy, no older than 7, tugged on his sleeve. "Are you the man who gave us the paint?" he asked, his eyes wide and curious. Adrian, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, was at a loss for words. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice thick. "Yes, I am." "Thank you," the boy said simply before running back to his easel. The two words, so simple and sincere, pierced through the armor of Adrian's cynicism. He had spent his life chasing multi-billion-dollar deals, but he had never felt the profound, grounding impact of a single, heartfelt thank you. He returned to the penthouse that evening a different man. The change was imperceptible to the outside world, but within him a tectonic plate had shifted. He started attending the Foundation's board meetings not as a critic, but as an active participant. He began to apply his formidable intellect to their problems, not to maximize profit, but to maximize impact. He used his old contacts to broker a deal for discounted art supplies, and he devised a logistical plan to expand the program to twice as many schools without increasing the budget. He was using his powers for good, and the feeling was more intoxicating than any stock market victory. This internal shift began to thaw the ice in his personal life. The silent, tense dinners were slowly replaced by hesitant conversations. He would ask Amelia about her day, and he would actually listen to her answer. He would tell her about his visits to the community centers, his voice tinged with a newfound passion. One evening, he finally found the courage to approach the subject that lay between them like a chasm. He found Amelia in the nursery softly humming as she folded a tiny blanket. "I went to see Marcus today," he began, his voice quiet. "I apologized. For everything. For the years I spent looking down on him, for underestimating him, for being a terrible brother." Amelia turned, her expression unreadable. "He was gracious," Adrian continued, a note of wonder in his voice. "He said he was just glad to have his brother back. We're going to have dinner next week, just the two of us." He took a hesitant step closer. "Amelia, I know that sorry is a meaningless word after everything I've done. It doesn't change the fact that I broke my vows, that I betrayed your trust in the most despicable way possible. I was a coward. I was weak. I was so blinded by my own ambition, so terrified of losing what I had built, that I lost sight of what was truly important. I lost you. I almost lost myself." He reached out, not to touch her, but as a gesture of supplication. His eyes, for the first time, were stripped of all artifice. They were raw, vulnerable, and filled with a profound, aching regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "God knows I don't deserve it. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your respect. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, but as a man, as your husband. I want to be a partner to you, Amelia, a real partner, in business and in life. I want to be a father our son can be proud of." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, the tears she had refused to shed for months. They were not tears of pain, but of catharsis, a release of the immense pressure she had been under, of the hope she had secretly harbored that this man, the man she had once loved so deeply, was still in there somewhere. She had waged a war not to destroy him, but to find him again. "The past is the past, Adrian," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We can't erase it, but we can build a new future together." She closed the small distance between them and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched in months without the pretense of a public appearance. His hand was warm, and he held hers as if he were holding onto life itself. A few weeks later, Amelia went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, and Adrian never left her side. He held her hand, he wiped her brow, he was her rock. In that sterile clinical hospital room, all the wealth and power in the world melted away, and there was only the two of them, a man and a woman, on the precipice of the most profound event of their lives. When their son Julian was finally born, a perfect, healthy boy with a tuft of dark hair, a nurse placed him in Adrian's arms. He looked down at the tiny, wrinkled face, at the small hands that curled around his finger, and his world tilted on its axis. A wave of love so fierce and overwhelming washed over him, a love that was pure, unconditional, and utterly transformative. It was a love that cleansed him of the last vestiges of his bitterness and pride. In that moment, he understood. He finally understood what it meant to have something truly valuable, something that could never be bought or sold. The birth of Julian marked the birth of a new era. Adrian, with a renewed sense of purpose, fully embraced his new role. He and Marcus, their fraternal bond, reforged, became a powerhouse leadership team, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. The company thrived, becoming a global benchmark, not just for its technology, but for its ethical and social contributions. One of their first acts as a united family was to deal with the specter of the Serenity. The yacht, which had been languishing in a Monaco harbor, was a symbol of a past he needed to obliterate. They sold it, and every last penny of the sale was used to establish a new independent wing of the Thorn Foundation, one dedicated solely to marine conservation and cleaning up the world's oceans. It was a deeply symbolic act of penance and rebirth. The vessel of his betrayal became a vessel of healing. Amelia never relinquished her majority ownership of the company. She remained the ultimate authority, the quiet guiding force behind the throne. But her rule was not one of an autocrat. It was a partnership. The four of them, Amelia, Adrian, Marcus, and the silent, influential presence of baby Julian, had become the board of a new kind of dynasty, one founded not on the shifting sands of wealth and power, but on the solid rock of mutual respect, shared values, and an enduring, hard-won love. The woman who had smiled from a helicopter, holding a contract that sealed her husband's fate, had done more than just win a war. She had redrawn the map, changed the rules of the game, and in doing so had saved not only her family and her company, but the very soul of the man she had refused to give up on. The king was no longer in a cage. He had been set free by the queen. And so the story of Amelia Thorne isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the unyielding power of a woman who refused to be a victim. She turned the tables on a world designed to keep her in a gilded cage, transforming betrayal into an empire of her own making. Her journey from a heartbroken wife to a formidable matriarch reminds us that true strength isn't about the absence of storms, but about learning to pilot your own helicopter through the heart of the hurricane. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate power move? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of drama, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of the rich, the powerful, and the women who dare to defy them.